Welcome back. We're discussing the controversial long-term security pact between the United States and Iraq, known as the Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA. Joining me is Anas Al-Tikriti, an Iraqi anti-war activist and founder of the Cordoba Foundation in London, from where he joins us. And in Boston, we have Nazar Al-Janabi, a former Iraqi army officer who's currently a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. But let's get back to our discussion. Let's get in a call from Nigeria, because Sada has been patiently waiting. Go ahead, Sada.
I think I would want to contribute that topically this issue that you have featured is one of the greatest mistakes that the Arab world has made. By allowing the invasion of Iraq and disrupting the entire unity of the Arab, they are now recycling the history of the invasion of Israel. That particular invasion that the U.S. has taken in Iraq is signaling the new dimension, the extra new dimension of colonialism. The United States of America is entirely interested in taking over the whole region and ensuring that the Arabs don't get anything easy.
All right.
The whole agenda of Israel is what will be enforced throughout the Arab world. So
Sada, let's get in. We're going to get another caller in actually before we get to a response. Gary in Nigeria also has something to say. Gary?
Yes, I just want to know the legitimacy of this SOFA agreement, because if America go into a sovereign nation and probably defeat them like what they did in Iraq, and now put a government of the day that was elected by themselves, and you now go ahead and sign the SOFA agreement with such kind of government, I think it is not proper, because if you don't have a legitimate government in place before you go into a country and you go ahead to sign such agreement like what they've got all over the world, I think it is inhuman,
okay.
It's demeaning. And
Gary, thank you for that. I'm going to put this to Nazar Al-Janabi, actually. The two comments made from Nigeria there. One that is the issue of the mistakes being recycled here, that colonial mistakes effectively are being recycled. And then Gary asked about the legitimacy of the Iraqi government to make this kind of deal at this stage if it's been a government that's been imposed upon the people.
Well, we all know that the current Iraqi government is probably the most legitimate government in the Middle East and probably in the Arab world. This government was elected through national elections, and we're currently looking at another elections that is coming in a few months, and then next national elections is next year. So the current government is absolutely legitimate, and there's no question about that. The whole international community recognizes that. I just wanted to follow up on the comment by Mr. Tikriti. The current Iraqi government is still, and I'm talking international law, is still the country of Iraq is still under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Security Council mandate, which means that any country under Chapter 7 is still a threat to international peace and security, and that the current situation in Iraq is mandated by the United Nations. If the Iraqi government chooses to enter this SOFA agreement, Iraq then will be out of this mandate, and Iraq will maintain full sovereignty. For me personally,
I'm not sure which is the lesser of two evils.
For me personally, I'm not in favor of that. Just for the best interest of Iraq's people, one of the things that might be affected. Iraq has over $50 billion in funds in the development funds of Iraq under the United Nations. If Iraq is out of Chapter 7 mandate, this $50 billion would be exposed to legal actions, and eventually Iraq would lose most of it, and the people of Iraq eventually will lose it.
Okay.
Currently, the United States in Iraq is investing a lot of money, not just to its soldiers. The United States is paying basically for more than half of the awakening movement that was able to clear Anbar, Salahuddin, and Mosul from Al-Qaeda.
Anas Al-Tikriti, Anas Al-Tikriti, just wait 1 second before. I just want to ask Mr. Janabi, the issue being raised here to some degree is that the US seems to be doing a bilateral deal, that even if the Chapter 7 Chapter 7 resolution expires, this is a bilateral deal. What happens to the other coalition forces? Do they have to do their own bilateral deals with Iraq?
If they are not included in the current SOFA agreement, Definitely they have to do their own agreements, because if it's not specified by the SOFA that has been negotiated now, that it involves the United States and the coalition, which basically constitutes the Multinational Security Force Iraq, the MNFI. If it's not specified in the SOFA, then they would have no legal status.
Okay.
There were some reports that the United Kingdom is also working on negotiating its own SOFA agreement with the Iraqi government, but it's not happened yet.
Okay, let's get Anas Al-Tikriti's response. Thanks for your patience.
Riz, I really loathe the suggestion that the Americans have, out of the kindness of their heart, the American administration, I differentiate between them and their people, but the American administration, out of the kindness of its heart, has invested so much money in Iraq. In light of the record oil prices that we have today, Iraq shouldn't be reliant on anyone at all. It could well settle all the debts that every single country in the world owes it and start its reconstruction business. Also, unfortunately, due to the governments, which Mr. Al-Janabi has claimed to be the most legitimate in the Arab world, due to those governments' corrupt methods, we have lost, according to the American Congress, more than $17 billion. That's just what we account for. 70 just disappeared in thin air. So to be honest, for the 50 million, Mr. Al-Janabi worried about the $50 billion, I wouldn't really worry about that. We have far greater problems.
Okay, so
but that's not the issue. That's not the issue. The issue is, in a legitimate government, I would ask this question: where do the Iraqi people? Where does the Iraqi people? Where do the Iraqi people stand in all this? Do they have a say? I put it to you that if the Iraqi people were sincerely asked the question, would you agree to this document or not? I think that the vast majority across all nationalist and sectarian borders would come out with the resounding answer: no. However, unfortunately, this legitimate government that Mr. Al-Janabi is speaking about does not have the power even to go back to the people and to ask for that sort of referendum.
Okay.
Something of national interest as big as this, we can't ask the person on the street.
Let me get a call in from Muhammad Isaac, who's in Somalia, waiting very patiently. Nice to hear from Somalia. Muhammad Isaac.
Hello, my name is Muhammad Isaac, and I want to ask you the question about what's the difference between Somalia and Iraq? Can they be Somalia and Iraq? Can they be
Go ahead.
Can they be new Israel for Arab nations, Iraq and Somalia?
Let me put it in this term to Nazar Al-Janabi. Obviously, a lot of people are skeptical about what is happening as far as the US's intentions in Iraq right now. How do you win over the confidence of those skeptical viewers, for example, that we've had? And of course, as Mr. Al-Tikriti says, get the will of the people fully expressed in Iraq.
Well, Rez, in a latest policy watch that I wrote, my conclusion was that although the current U.S. administration and the current Iraqi government are negotiating a SOFA agreement, I don't think, and it's my analysis and my thought, that I don't think a SOFA agreement could be reached with the current conditions. The Iraqi government is legitimate, yet it cannot sign a SOFA agreement without ratification through the parliament, and the current consensus in Iraq that they're not willing to enter a SOFA agreement. So I think I agree with Mr. Tikriti. The people of Iraq are not willing to enter a SOFA agreement for the time being. And I don't think Maliki and the current government can enter such an agreement without parliamentary ratification. And it's not going to happen within the time frame suggested. It's not going to. They cannot gather the national consensus in Iraq in order to approve such an agreement. So what Iraqis are going to do eventually is go back to the United Nations Security Council and request an extension of the mandate of the current MNFI until next year, probably, with a new administration in Washington, a new administration in Baghdad, maybe negotiation would reconvene.
Just a quick thought here as we end, because we're out of time. An email that came in from Oman says, the topic of the US in Iraq is dragging out so long that I firmly believe neither I nor millions of people want to discuss or hear about it anymore. On that note, I'm sorry we're out of time. On the next show, we look at what China is doing in Africa, as some say amounts to a resources grab. We'll see you next time.